Our next speaker is Alan Shepard from the Bureau of Land Management here in the Reno, Nevada office. And been trying to get Alan to the forum for a couple of times. He's been tied up quite a lot. He's in a program that gets a lot of attention. Talk about socio-political challenges. He's also in the cubicle across from me, so I hear a lot of the congressional inquiries and things. And, Alan is a very patient, very thoughtful, and very caring individual when it comes to horses and burros. And I'm amazed at the amount of flack you take for your job. So I'm really impressed with how you do it without going ballistic.
A lot of pharmaceuticals.
All right, let's see here. Where's slideshow? Play. All right. You need to stay close.
Okay.
And then we'll
Okay.
take questions. And we'll give you a little bit of time.
Is this the,
Yeah, I think that's it. Try going.
okay, that's what, this one. As Todd said, I have an interesting job. I have to deal with a lot of different folks and in different aspects of my job, different pieces of society and things like that. So the horse program nationally is a very hot topic right now. I think it will be for a while. We kind of seeing the different things we're talking about here, the cycles, and that's the horse program. The horse program will follow that cycle just almost identical. It's ups and downs and in twos and fros, so it's pretty interesting. The Wild Horse and Burro Act was passed in 1971. I'm sure some of you know. That declared wild horses and burros as a living symbol of the West. A lot of people take this to heart and care about this a lot. And it definitely means a lot of things to a lot of people. Some quick facts about our program. We have roughly 100. We have 179 herd management areas across the West. It varies up and down a little bit because we combine things, and like people want to do, we're splitters and lumpers, so we do a lot of things. The state of Nevada, for example, we have 93 herd management areas managed between the BLM Nevada, BLM California, within the boundaries of the state of Nevada. We have almost 41,000 wild horses and burros across the West, with a target population of 26,600. So as you can see, we're a little ways over our target population number that we really would like to manage for. Nevada alone, we have somewhere in the 21 to 23,000. So we manage half the horses in the state, or the West, the state of Nevada does. And we actually have a target of about 12,600 or 700 horses. So we're off target by a considerable amount too. And that all those numbers have an impact of what we do on the land and how we manage horses. This is just a quick shot of the West where we have horses. The blue outline is where we actively manage horses right now. That's our herd management areas. The red areas, in addition to the blue areas, are what we call herd areas. That's what was established and identified in 1971 to about 74 of where horses were on the landscape at that point in time at the passage of the act. The management of horses is, like we said, a political hotbed. Every facet of the United States is involved in this somehow, from the rich to the poor. And I look at it in the sense that the BLM, Forest Service, and the horses, we're kind of stuck in the middle of this big rubber band, and we're being pulled in two different directions. We never know where we exist in it at all times. We've got the activists, advocates, whichever realm you want to call it, at one end pulling us, the ones that want us to not touch the horses, keep them there. We want thousands and thousands. We want millions of acres for them. And then you got the other side that are, we want as few as possible or manage to the number you've set in the sense of our livestock industry, our fish and wildlife agencies, things like that. So we're in this tug of war, sliding scale of what we're doing and where we're at. we manage all of our areas for 4 basic components: food, water, cover, and space. It's very critical. You can't have a active population of anything, humans or anything, without those 4 things. We have horses and burros on every type of habitat across the West, from the deserts to the grasslands of Wyoming, to sagebrush in the Great Basin, to the pinyon juniper. We've got horses in the lodgepole pine up in Oregon, so we've got them all over. They will adapt and exist in anything. People's backyards, of anybody from this area that live in Damani Ranch or Hidden Valley or anything, they live in your backyard. The estray horses that the state of Nevada manages that are separate from BLM horses. One of the big issues that we deal with as wild horse managers and public land managers is we have to deal with all the different changes that happen. Drought is one of our biggest concerns in the horse program. I've been in the program for 22 years, almost 23 years now, and I've seen it fluctuate. We'll have consecutive years of bad, good years, consecutive years of bad, and we have to adjust our management accordingly all the time. I was looking at this the other day to see a comparison of what we did last year, of where we were sitting last year at this time versus now. And I thought last year was bad in April, and we're actually worse off now than we were a year later. We're doing all kinds of drought work right now, and for livestock and wildlife and horses, and we had snow this year, so everybody, we get to go out and graze, we get to, we got plenty of habitat for the horses, and it's actually, we're worse off this year going into the spring and the summer than we were a year ago. So it's going to be an interesting year, I feel. One of our big things definitely is the management of the habitat itself. We're always looking at what our use levels are, what our growing conditions are, what kind of forage production we have to be able to support our populations. This photo is in the end of June in 2005, kind of a normal year, what it should look like. This is a big seeding project down in Pinyon Juniper in southeast Nevada. So I would kind of, normal year. 2 years before that same time period, that's coming out of, no growth at all. There is nothing growing there. There's horse use on it from the previous year as well currently. So you can see the drastic changes. And then this year, or this is from September 2011, following the big winter everybody had in the West that year, we grew feed up to our, our knees and our waists in some areas. This has got horse use on it, it had cattle use on it, and it still looks like it's never been grazed. It's that same general area from the previous pictures, but it looks like it's never been touched. So you just see these huge undulations at times on some of our areas in public land. So it's a critical thing that we're monitoring that and staying on top of it. This past summer, in an area southeast of Carson City. It's a open salt brush dominated community. It's got a lot of rice grass in it and some poa, some various other species, forage grass species. But there is absolutely no growth in it that year. It didn't do anything. This is one of our hardest hit areas. We actually had to do an emergency gather in this area to basically save horses' lives. This is a plant that was from that same general photo. You can see the shrub that the horses basically go in there looking for that grass wherever they can find it, and they will absolutely destroy that shrub plant to get to that grass. The grass is gnawed down to about a quarter to maybe a half an inch tall. They will take it down to the bare dirt if they can do it in order to survive. And what this generally just leads to, it's just you're taking that biomass off, you're endangering all those plants. eliminated a pretty key forage shrub for one thing, and you're impacted the perennial grass that was associated with it. One of the other issues outside of forage is water. This is a trail cam photo. We use trail cams extensively now to do a lot of our monitoring when we can't get into hidden spring sources, or we trying to figure out what else is going on around water sources and things like that. You can see the two stud horses fighting. That's a really common thing that occurs around water, especially in drought situations. There's very limited water at this site because the spring's going dry. It was flowing, I believe we measured it at 1/8 of a gallon a minute, and we had 400 head of horses watering on this site. They would come in, fight, somebody would get a drink and leave. You can really see, and I'm using the old stool, the condition of the stud horses. They're chunky, they're round, they got some flesh on them. It's pretty typical of what happens with wild horses. The stud horse will be the first one to water. He'll get a drink and take his mares and go away. It's very male dominant when it comes to shortage of food. A mare leads the group, she leads him to get to it, he takes it. It's pretty dominated, male-wise. I don't know if you can see her quite well. This horse here, kind of the background, you can see her leg bones sticking, her neck sunk in. That mare's at what we call a body class 2. She's probably 2 months or a month away, if that, from death. That's pretty tough conditions. This is her foal. That's the reason she's in the condition she's in. The drought occurs, water leaves, forage leaves. Mares put all their energy in the baby. It's survival. If they keep the baby, sometimes they'll just walk away and survive themselves. It's, again, survival of the fittest. But that's one of the big issues we have to contend with in management. The other thing is, we'll get big concentrations of horses around individual waters because it's so scarce during the drought, and they make significant use. The little remnant green gold you see out and scattered around, that's cheatgrass that grew in 2011. That's all they're eating because it didn't grow in 12 at all. So they're eating cheatgrass straw from a year before, and that's what there was existing on, other than eating shrub species that they normally don't eat. So you see this grouping of horses, and they start to get along finally because they know they have to, basically, in a lot of cases. And it's a pecking order. They'll wait in line. One will get a drink and leave. The next one will come in, and the next one, and they keep doing that. In this case, we actually set up the water haul facility to haul water to these horses here. We actually, to this spot here, we were hauling 10,000 gallons of water a week to keep this herd of horses there in the area that we later did a managed removal on there to reduce the population. This herd management area was 4.5 times its appropriate management level. This is the trough that was in the picture. This is what the horses were existing on before we started hauling water. That little stream of water was running about 1/4 gallon a minute from the little spring source. And when this picture was taken, there was 200 horses within roughly a half-mile radius around that water, waiting to come get a drink, or actually it had a little bit of a slurp and left. The destruction that a horse can do, the degradation to riparian sources, it becomes pretty obvious during drought conditions. They make significant use at times anyway around riparian sources, taking forage out and the riparian vegetation. But the more concentrated, the more limited it becomes and the horses become more concentrated, it just pounds and pounds, and sooner or later you could lose the entire riparian spot other than the little source where it comes up and maybe a puddle. And then they just continue to degrade it from there. It never responds until it's either fenced and rehabbed or it just ceased to flow. This is in that same general area. Again, this is near Carson City. This is a little seep hidden in the trees, and there's so many horses concentrated now, they've turned it in basically into a mud bath, trying to get a drink out of the little source. Here's the picture of that water facility that we built. This is the only way we can prolong a lot of the herds. When the water gets low, we have to do something for them. We're bound with management. We care about the horses. We really want to make sure that we don't have anybody suffering out there. So we in 2012, the summer 2012, the Nevada BLM, we spent somewhere in the vicinity of $200,000 hauling water to horses in a number of different areas just to sustain them because of drought conditions. Another aspect of the effects of drought is the big groups of horses trailing in areas and really working over the landscape. This is an old burn site, but the horses have completely prohibited regrowth in the area because of concentrations and around the waters and things like that. But big trailing like that creates huge spider webs like that. This is a very common scene in a lot of our areas where we have isolated water sources and large numbers of horses, just big trails coming in because they come from all directions to get to that water. And what this will eventually lead to in a lot of cases will be the erosion. If we have a big rain or a big snow event or something like that, it just starts running on those like little rivers. So by managing numbers, we hope to be able to not have this type of an issue. And the greatest effect of drought is on the animals themselves. This horse is from from an area in northeast Utah. These horses were affected by lack of forage as well as water during a drought situation. Really poor body condition. You can see the most horses should have a back line where that sinks in. These horses are pyramid. I mean, they've absorbed all the muscle mass out of their back line and their ribs and their shoulders and necks to keep themselves alive. They're basically eating themselves to keep alive. I talked about the effects of drought on the mares and the babies. This is from near Carson City, that in those pictures I showed earlier. There's three pieces of the population that are really affected by drought. You've got the older mares, or the older horses generally, say 15 and older. Then you have the young mares from about 3 or 4 down, and then the babies. This mare here, she's a condition class 2 mare, getting low on the lowest on the totem pole condition wise. She's about 4 years old. This is her 2012 foal. My best guess on the age of that foal, this was taken in November, I would put its age at about 6 to 7 months. That foal right there on normal is probably, in a normal year, that's about the size they are when they're 2 months old, maybe 3 months old. You can kind of tell her tail's that long down below the hocks. It's just amazing that it's that stunted because of lack of groceries. It's what it comes down to. Mama's not giving her the nutrition. And then you got to go, this is the same bunch of horses. These are big pen of mares. These are older class mares that didn't have foals with them, but you can see just the condition they end up in from the lack of feed and water. And then you got the extreme. This is a group of horses that one thing about wild horses is they're very habituated to water. They'll stay in one spot until it dries up and either die right there, or we have to move them, or something springs in their head finally that we can go and try to find water. This group of horses was so habituated to the water source that they were on, they died right where they were at. They would not move. And because we didn't realize this group of horses were there, it was actually a Utah photo, but the manager in that area didn't realize the horses were using that area, that they were found by a county maintenance worker working on a road. And it was too late to get in there to do anything about it. They actually got a couple horses out of there that were alive, hauled them off, and were successful in saving them. But out of, I think it was 25 head of horses, I think it was 20 that died. So the impacts that we saw in 2012 across Nevada were definitely, we had a lot of horses moving on us. They were moving outside the herd management areas, trying to find forage and water. I think based on the conditions we're seeing now, it's gonna expand. We're gonna intensify that this year. Again, another thing we saw was the horses were already using their winter range habitat by July and August, where they shouldn't have been on it until October, November. So they were coming out of the mountain down into the valleys and using winter range by summertime because there was no feed up top and no water. We saw significantly reduced and declines in our water and forage across the landscape. It wasn't isolated areas. Usually our conditions are isolated. It seems like from year to year. Last year was probably the most consistent, broad scope drought impact that I saw across the state of Nevada in my time here. And then in some of those areas where I showed that water haul photo, the horses in that picture, to get any amount of forage, they were traveling up to 20 miles from that water source, one direction, to get a big belly full of food and then come back again. So they were probably watering only every 2 or 3 days. So what can we do, or what normally do we do? Normally we will leave the animals there as long as we can and continue monitoring what's going on until we decide, well, it's a water issue, we'll start hauling water to them. We do not feed horses on the range. Most of the time the horses don't know what it is. They'll walk right beside it and just keep on going. Plus it's a change in the diet. It affects their whole system. It messes up their stomach content, their stomach balance. So it's actually harder on the horses than it is to just remove them. Our third option is to conduct a gather to remove a population to whatever level we feel can exist in the current conditions. Most of the time, our last resort is to euthanize horses on the range and then remove additional animals. That occurs very, very seldom. Most of the time we gather them way before that ever happens. And then the absolute last resort is basically letting nature take its course and let them survive the way they want to survive. A lot of our activists out there would prefer we just leave them alone. Let them do what they need to do. If they survive, they survive. But also, if they get in bad condition, they also flip the coin on us. And what are you doing? Why ain't you doing something for them? So it's kind of tough. But the way I look at it, if we leave nature to do it, Mother Nature ain't a very nice lady. She does pretty nasty work. So, any questions?
I have one.
Okay.
Well, it seems like we're double what the targets that you guys have set.
Mhm.
So, are you doing anything to reduce them so you don't, if there were less horses on the range, then maybe they wouldn't be starving that.
If I got the question right, is we have double the population, and what are we doing to get it down so they're not in this condition?
Yeah, get down to your target.
That's the, was it $77 million question? That's what our annual budget is. We spend roughly 40 or 65% of that feeding and caring for horses that we've already removed from the public lands as for management. We would love to be at target number because we think in most cases our numbers are good and can survive and support the numbers that are there at an ecological balance. It really comes down to the fact that we don't have space to remove the horses to put them into across in our facilities, as well as we have two types of facilities, short-term and long-term. Our long-term facilities are big pasture situations, generally in the Midwest. It's becoming, they're so successful at living and so successful at reproducing that we can't keep up with it in a lot of cases. We're trying different things from fertility control to looking at long-term full sterilization, all kinds of stuff. So we're doing our best that we can, looking at the tools that we have at this time, and then trying to find new tools to get to those numbers. But it definitely, numbers on the range is an issue. It definitely is an issue, and we're trying to figure out how to do it. But it really comes down to we've made a conscious national effort that if we take a horse off, we're going to maintain it. We're going to take care of it as best we can, and it really impacts us budget-wise that way. Yes, sir.
Are there any predators that feed on these horses or prey on these horses?
Predators of wild horses, burros. There's a few. In some areas, you'll have lions take a small number of horses every year. Generally, lions are very opportunistic as much as they can. And what some of the research is showing, you almost have to teach him to eat it. There's some studies working right now to see if there's how the connection works. But there's a couple herd areas that lions may have an impact. They may not. I think it changes based on population numbers. Coyotes will take a few. Generally, the young foals, the little guys, they'll run them down and get a foal that way. One of our biggest actually is pedestrians running them over. That's a real big issue with our in our urban interface areas. Las Vegas, for example, big problem with cars hitting burros out in Red Rocks. But generally there's not. Drought, cold weather is probably the only predator out there that's effective. Yes, sir.
If you let the natural conditions just go and you didn't manage, would they reach an equilibrium?
Yeah, I think at some point they will, but the problem, in my opinion, is that equilibrium will be so low in the where it should be, because horses, like that picture shows, will eat themselves out of house and home, and any species will. The deer and the kaibab years and years ago did it, and horses will do the same thing. They'll destroy their habitat before they really drop off, before reproduction. For example, in the gathers we did as emergencies for this past summer, we only seen probably a 20% drop in the number of foals in the population from previous gathers, so they're surviving. They're tough little buggers. I mean, these horses are really durable, they're really adaptable, and they have a will to live. And those mares are keeping those babies alive at the detriment of themselves. But I think they would eventually, but I think they would destroy their habitat first, to such a point that, one, you're never going to improve the habitat again, because they would just keep it at equilibrium. But I think you would take it to a certain level where they kind of balance themselves out, but I don't think your habitat would be very good. Yes, sir?
It's sounding like the primary effect of weather and climate is through food and water. I'm not hearing much about heat stress or cold stress or maybe disease.
No.
Or indirect.
No, the question is the effect of forage and water versus other effects. I think these horses are so adapted to their environment, the cold, the heat, and all that. We've got horses that live in the Mojave Desert that do perfectly well. They're not as robust and shiny as maybe a Great Basin horse. They're pretty thin and refined. But they've handled the winters. I've seen them in 115 in Vegas and 35 below in Wyoming. So they live. They'll go dig through the snow. They'll like I said, they'll travel for miles to go get a drink. So yeah, they're pretty adapted. They're pretty resilient until a major thing like a significant drought or a prolonged drought. We had our biggest losses that I've ever seen naturally was in probably 2003 to 7 or 8 when we had that big long stretch in Nevada in the Great Basin where it was consecutive years. That was the first time I really noticed a lot of loss. But and when I say a lot, it was 10% or 15% of the population, not 20, 30, 40. You'd find isolated little pockets where they were habituated to a water or something like that, and they would die off. Yes, sir?
You think that privatizing wild horse and burro management is, I guess, a good idea or a bad idea?
Privatizing wild horses and burro management.
I'm thinking of a project in particular.
I'm looking at it. I think there's aspects of the program that could be privatized. You know, something to promote like ecotourism or something like that, where they're just a specific location. But overall management, I don't think would work. I think there's aspects of the program that could, use I guess a kick in the pants from the private sector, because that's where the money generally is going to become because of people's caring and willing to want to do something. Humans always have that I want to do something right type mentality and care. I think there's some pieces there that could help, but the actual on the ground, outside of new research on population controls and things like that, I think it would come down to just once we have to remove them and being able to place them somewhere would be the private sector.
We're gonna take one more question from this lady who's
Okay.
patient, and then since this is more about economics, and since we've had this foreclosure crisis and economic crisis in Nevada, a lot of people are dumping their horses. And how do dumped horses, feral horses, change the herd dynamics of genuinely wild horses? And does that affect the population?
The releasing of domestic horses into the wild. Actually in Nevada, we haven't seen it as much as like the Utah, Colorado has seen it a fair amount. In reality, most of the dumping of domestics is occurring in the big urban inner areas, especially the southeast.
Right.
Seeing big volumes of horses. Texas, seeing big volumes of horses where people just drive down the road, stop alongside, kick the horse trailer open and drop them off in the interstate ditch. Happens a lot. We always catch a few domestic horses on a horse gather when we do a big one. But generally it's a stock horse that got away, sheep herder, didn't understand how to tie the horse up and he got away. We have horses that'll come in and steal mares from break down a corral or knock a hole in it and the mares will get out. So generally it's incidental. And most of the time, if it's a mare, it'll take a while and a stallion will round it up and take it into the harem. Geldings, stud horses, domestics, generally don't do very well. They pretty low on the pecking order. Most domestics have no clue how to fight. So a little tiny harem stud will come in and just whip them. And usually they're just shunned. They're just the outcasts who wander around by themselves. They may buddy up with a wild bachelor stud or something, but usually they're pretty much alienated in the wild. The mares will be accepted over a period of time, but I've also seen mares that were in some of the areas I managed that we could never catch for some reason, that were domestic, and they were just by themselves, never with a stud horse, never part of a harem. They just kind of like a bachelorette.
Thanks, Alan.
Okay, thank you.